Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alison, the online piano and the online violin tutor. So in this video I'm going to talk to you about why you should not buy a cheap violin and the kind of, the main disadvantages to not buying a cheap violin. A lot of you out there might just think, oh, violin's a violin. It absolutely It couldn't be further from the truth. It might look that way, but it's the same with anything in life. Something always looks the same. So yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about why you should not buy a cheap violin. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not dissing cheap violins. I know there's kind of two schools of thought, isn't there? That if you don't have a lot of money, but you want to play the violin. So, you know, some of you have said in the comments, in the past that, oh, I've got a violin for $40 or $60 or something like that, and you know, that's great and that's enough to try it out, but a violin at that kind of price would be something that I would want to upgrade to very, very, very quickly. I get that you don't have a lot of money to spend, or I also get that you don't want to spend a lot of money because, you know, 5 minutes down the line you might not want to play the violin anymore. And that's absolutely fine. Then you haven't just wasted $200-300 on something that, you know, 5 minutes ago you thought was a really good idea, but now you can't be bothered, or it's not for you, or, you know, you've got other life commitments. So I get that. And I guess you can go ahead and buy a $30 violin, but I would want to upgrade that super, super quickly. So here are the reasons why you should not. And I'm going to be using this violin, which is all I've got to hand at the moment. I know there's nothing on it. It's very, very naked at the moment, but it doesn't matter because I just want to, I just want to be able to use this as a prop to show you. If I am looking down, it's just because I've made some notes on my iPad and I want to just make sure that I stay on track and give you all the information needed without going off on any tangents. In my personal opinion, as are all the statements in this video, they are all my personal opinion. If you don't agree with me, that's absolutely fine. These are just my thoughts and my opinions. So how much constitutes a cheap violin? Personally, for me, I would say anything under $200 and anything under £200 would be a cheap violin. Anything roughly under that kind of price is going to be cheap, poorly made, poorly set up, and it will cause you more problems than it's worth. So again, going back to my previous sentence where I said, you know, a $60 violin is fine, I would want to be changing that within the first few weeks, especially if you're liking the violin and getting on with it. You'd be amazed how much progress, if you really focused, you'd be amazed how much progress you can make in just a few weeks. And by then you'll know whether it's something that you want to continue on with or not. If that's the case, then I would start to upgrade. So playing and learning on a really cheap violin can have a very, very adverse effect on your progress. Now, a lot of people don't really agree with this, or a lot of people just don't want to agree with this. They just don't want to admit it, just because it involves buying another violin. And, you know, a lot of people would say, yeah, but Alison, you could make a $60 violin sound great. That's not the point. I've got the experience of so many years of playing the violin, so obviously I'm going to make something like this sound really, really great, even though it's not, because I know better. So I know that it's heavy, so I can compensate for that. I know that it's going to be scratchy, so I can kind of compensate for that. So I've overcome all the scratchiness, the out of tune, the hitting of the strings. I've overcome all of that, so I can kind of I can adjust my style accordingly to make a violin like that sound great. But even then, I have certain limitations with it. If it's really that bad, then I'm just not going to make it sound that great, regardless of how good I am or how good a player is. So a violin that gives you a poor response is basically just a lot like a slow computer that has a low capability, really. So whatever you're trying to do on that computer is going to be so slow, and it's just not going to happen, especially if you're doing something like photoshopping, video editing, online gaming. You know, you're playing Halo, or I don't know, something like that. It's just like having slow internet as well. It's just the computer is going to struggle. It's going to hinder you. You're going to be stopped in the middle of your computer game, and then by the time it all unfreezes, everyone's killed you and taken all of your magic potions off you and all that kind of thing. Basically, you will not accomplish the same thing on a violin that does not support you. I'm not saying, as I said, I'm not saying that you're going to have to spend $500 or £500 plus on as a very beginner, but just going for a good instrument, a good brand and a good model would be preferable than just buying one of these cheap ass violins that you get off of eBay or Amazon or wherever else it is. So these cheap violins are just not going to stay in tune. The angle and the placement of the strings, even though there are none on this, are going to be off. The tone of the instrument is going to be squeaky, yeah, definitely, and horrendous sounding, not to mention, and the fingerboard will eventually warp, causing issues with the bridge. I know I don't have a bridge on here, but we'll have to use our imagination on this one. So the strings are not going to stay in tune. The strings are not going to stay in tune because the peg box is terrible. For that kind of money that you're paying, the cheap money, you're not going to be, I've got nothing on these and I can't even get these out. So these aren't even going to be made of ebony. So usually the tailpiece on this one is just alloys, which means it's very, very heavy. So usually the tailpiece, the fingerboard and the pegs are made out of ebony wood, which is the best wood that you can get for violin pegs and that kind of thing. But as you can see, as I'm putting, well, this peg goes into a certain point. I shouldn't be having to yank the peg out like that, basically, is what I'm trying to demonstrate. So I'll put the peg into a certain point until, it feels like it sort of, see, it doesn't even reach anywhere near the other end, and then it's very difficult, and if you can hear that, it's very difficult to turn. So when you turn them, they're either just not going to turn or they're just going to slip right back, one of the two, and then you have to try and get your bar of soap out, or you have to use peg compound or peg grip or something like that, and it's extra things that you're having to do and you're having to buy when you shouldn't actually have to. So this is what happens when you buy cheap violins. I know a lot of you put in the comments that you can't tune your violin, you've broken strings. The reason why you're breaking all these strings is probably not to mention that as you're tuning, you're probably yanking the peg so far that you're trying to tune it from nothing all the way up like 2.5 octaves. So that's probably why you're breaking strings, because you're tuning it too fast. I've got videos on the tuning anyway if you want to check those out. But also because the pegs just aren't, they just aren't moving. They either aren't moving or you're having the opposite problem where they're slipping because the peg box is crap, basically. So they just don't fit in the holes, as you can tell from this, how much of a, I shouldn't be doing this. They should just sort of neatly go in and out, and they should be able to twist. The other end of the peg should be flush here, but it's not. It's about 3 or 4 millimeters still inside there. They just don't fit, and that is what you're paying for. And to be perfectly honest, tuning is one of the biggest things in the violin. If you can't tune your violin, how on earth can you even play it if you can't even tune it? So, you get rid of that nightmare immediately once you spend the money on a much better violin. It's like a breath of fresh air, going from something like this to something $200 plus, where it's a good make and it's a good brand. Tuning is just going to be a breeze. So the placement of the strings, again, I know there isn't any strings in here, but if the tailpiece, if you've got I haven't got the button on here either, but if you've got the button on and that's not in the right place, and then you've got the tailpiece and that's moving around all over the place, and you've got strings that are not perfectly in the middle here, the string placement is going to be off. So when you do upgrade to another violin, you're going to have to do everything all over again. Imagine if you've been practicing for a whole year on a cheap, $50 violin, for example, and you think you've just about got everything down, despite a year's worth of struggling to get rid of the scratch, the hitting of the other strings, and the god-awful tuning and everything like that. Imagine upgrading to a new violin, everything being exactly as it should, and then you're hitting strings all over again. The tuning is going to be great, that's fine, but your intonation is going to be off because everything is going to be slightly different. Because the violin is based around so much muscle memory, where you're remembering where your fingers go, that's what you're relying on. So anything that's even 1/4 of a millimeter off is going to cause you massive amounts of intonation difficulty. So if you buy right in the first place, you're not going to have to relearn everything all over again. So if I break down what I've said about the violin just a little bit further. So when you get your $60 violin, whatever it is, $100 violin, it's not going to be play up out of the box. You're going to have to do a lot of setting up, for example. So you're going to have to set the bridge up. So the bridge probably won't be on, the bridge will be off, or it'll be laying down, it would have collapsed, or sometimes they put them in the end of the case. So you physically got to put the bridge on. The strings will be on, unlike this, but the strings will be on and attached to the tail piece, but you're going to have to put the bridge in, which is a royal pain, because when you start tuning, the bridge pops down. So if you don't know what you're doing there, you're going to have a nightmare of a time, not only just tuning it, but just when you think you've got the bridge up and straight, you go to tune it and then the bridge just pops down again, and it's a never-ending nightmare. The string action, which is determined by the bridge, this is the distance of the strings from the fingerboard. So if it's too high, then it's going to be too hard to play because you're going to be using too much pressure from your left hand. And if it's too low, you're going to get unwanted vibrations and rattling, and you're going to hit loads of other strings because the string is going to be too flat. Then we come on to the bridge. So you're going to be getting a poor quality and angled bridge. The bridge, as well as the body and the sound post, go a long way in helping to project the sound and give you the kind of sound that you do and don't want. If the bridge is of poor composition, then obviously the sound as a result is going to be poor, and it will likely warp and constantly tip over when tuning the strings, which I've pretty much already mentioned. Not only that, but a poorly angled bridge will simply mean you hit all the other strings, not ever allowing you to properly isolate and learn the correct angle of the bow on each string. So you can't just go out and buy a new bridge. Oh, I've got a cheap violin, I'll just buy a new bridge, because unfortunately, bridges don't come set up for each individual violin, depending on how each individual violin is made. And this is what I'm talking about when a violin is not just a violin. One violin does not suit all. This peg will pretty much not fit in any other violin the way it should do. I mean, it doesn't even fit in this violin the way it should do, but suffice to say that the peg on my antique violin would not fit appropriately in here. It might be okay, but it won't fit the hole in here or a hole on another violin. So I can't just take out pegs and just stick them into other peg boxes. It just doesn't work like that, because each violin is kind of made individually and specific to that. Again, that's why you pay the money. Hopefully you're kind of starting to see the differences between the violins. The bridge for this one will be set at a certain height that is suitable for this. As I said, when you buy a brand new bridge, perhaps something like a Despial bridge, it more or less just comes flat. What you would then do is take that bridge to your violin luthier, who will then file down the feet to make sure it's not too high, and then they will angle the bridge according to your specifications. The neck of the violin is probably going to be very badly carved and probably going to feel quite rough as well, depending on how they've done it, and depending on how much they've filed down the sides where they've put the fingerboard onto the neck as well. But I mean, for me, it doesn't cause so much trouble because again, I've been playing for so many years, so I can kind of compensate for any irregularities. So you'll probably find that the neck is very poor, and that's going to hinder you when just generally moving, when you want to move into positions. But hopefully by the time you get onto stage where you're moving into different positions, you're not playing on your $60 violin. And then at the end here, I've just put my opinion, folks. It's a false economy to progress into buying yet another cheap violin, because as you progress, you'll begin to find and see these faults, and then you just won't want to play the violin. So as I said in the beginning, you've got two options. You can just buy a cheap violin, you know, just to test out the water, dip your toe in the water, see how it feels. But then you've got to upgrade very, very quickly. If you keep with that cheap violin, then you're just not going to make the progress that you want to make. So you're not going to be making the progress, you're not going to want to play it, you know, everything's going to be sounding rubbish, and you get yourself into that vicious cycle. You're in that kind of catch-22 that isn't, you know, that isn't great to be in. You don't want to practice because it sounds rubbish. You can't progress, so you're not progressing, you're not practicing, you don't want to practice because you can't, you know, so that's really not a great cycle to be in. And even at the beginner stage, if you've got a cheap violin, you may not even be conscious of the reasons why you find yourself not liking the violin, but it'll be a combination of being displeased with the tone and sometimes even finding, you know, the sound of the instrument painful, which, you know, I have heard of in the past. Being unable to tune it, having parts break off, the feel that a cheap violin just doesn't really fit in the hand, the visual ugliness of something so cheaply made, the overall bad feeling of having an object that just wasn't made with care. So you're just going to quickly find it very difficult to progress much beyond the basics. So plus spending $60, £60 on a violin, then feeling like you have to spend a small fortune to gear it out, is just also cost prohibitive as well. I mean, you can add a few things on the violin, but just thinking, oh, I can just buy a $60 violin and then I can just whack a load of stuff on it. Well, you can't, because you can't just buy a bunch of pegs, because you've got to then get them you've got to get them fitted in, and that's going to cost you a fortune. The same with a bridge as well, so you may as well just have bought a better violin in the first place. So I hope you found this video useful to you. What I will put underneath this video is a link of all the violins I personally recommend that I have reviewed on my channel, so you can go ahead and watch all those videos. You can listen to how they sound. You can, you know, choose based on what you feel is best in your budget and that kind of thing. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you found the video useful, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.